The silence of a lie lasts exactly 19 years, until the man who owns the city decides to listen.
Julian Banks had everything: a multi-billion-dollar empire, a perfect family, and an untouchable reputation. He thought he had buried his past under a mountain of legal paperwork, believing a signed check and a non-disclosure agreement had erased the daughter he abandoned in Seoul. But in the world of Shin Yong-Sun, ghosts don't stay buried, they are summoned. When this powerful Korean mafia boss discovers the truth, he doesn't just demand justice, he demands a reckoning. The demand didn't come with threats of violence, but with something far more terrifying: absolute certainty. Julian is about to find out that blood is the one debt you can never truly settle, and when a dragon demands the truth, lying isn't just foolish, it's a death sentence for everything you've built. Please subscribe and hit the bell. The real fight for the Banks empire starts now. 3 weeks earlier, Julian Banks stood in the center of the Emerald Ballroom like a king surveying his kingdom. The Seattle Business Leaders Gala was in full swing, and every person in the room wanted something from him. A handshake. A photo. 5 minutes of his time. They moved around him like planets orbiting the sun, their laughter too loud, their smiles too wide, their respect carefully measured in the weight of their compliments. Julian wore it all like a second skin. His tuxedo was custom-tailored, the fabric so fine it whispered when he moved. His watch cost more than most people's cars. His smile was practiced in mirrors and sharpened in boardrooms, the kind of expression that promised everything and committed to nothing. At 52, he had the look of a man who'd won every game he'd ever played: silver hair combed back with precision, a jaw that suggested strength, and eyes that calculated profit margins even during casual conversation. "Julian, wonderful speech tonight," Senator Morrison said, gripping his hand with both palms. "That bit about innovation and tradition, brilliant. Simply brilliant." Julian nodded, accepting the praise like it was his due. Because it was. He'd built Banks International from a single investment firm into a network that touched 3 continents. He employed 4,000 people. He had his name on 2 buildings and a scholarship fund. He was untouchable. "Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that." Julian's voice was smooth, warm, the vocal equivalent of expensive leather. "Have you had a chance to try the salmon? The chef is from that new place on Pine Street." They talked about food. About the upcoming election. About a development deal in Bellevue that would need the right permits. The conversation was easy, practiced, and safe. This was Julian's world, surfaces polished to perfection, everything underneath carefully managed. Across the room, his wife Caroline laughed at something a tech CEO's spouse had said. She wore diamonds that caught the light, her blonde hair swept into an elegant twist. They'd been married for 18 years. They had 2 children, Marcus, 16, and Sophia, 14. Both in private schools. Both destined for Ivy League universities. Both are legitimate. Both wanted. Both his. Julian excused himself from the senator and moved toward the bar, nodding at familiar faces, shaking hands, playing the part he'd perfected. He ordered another scotch, single malt, expensive enough to be notable but not so expensive as to seem wasteful. Image was everything. Control was everything. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first. Tonight was about being seen, about reminding Seattle's power players that Julian Banks was the center around which their world turned. But the phone buzzed again. And again. 3 times in rapid succession. With a slight frown, Julian stepped toward the hallway, away from the music and conversation. He pulled out his phone, expecting an urgent message from his assistant or perhaps a crisis at one of the Tokyo offices. Instead, he saw a name he hadn't thought about in months: David Chen, his personal attorney. The message was short: "Need to discuss the 2006 matter. Client has resurfaced. Requesting meeting." Julian's jaw tightened. His fingers went cold around the phone. 2006, the year he'd paid to make a problem disappear. The year his lawyers had drafted documents that sealed away a mistake he'd made during a business trip to Seoul. The year a woman he barely remembered told him she was pregnant, and he'd responded with a check and a legal agreement. The year Althea Shin was born. He deleted the message without responding. Chen knew better than to bring this up. They'd settled it years ago. Money had changed hands. Papers had been signed. The matter was closed. Dead. Buried under layers of legal protection that would take years to break through. Julian slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to the ballroom. He picked up his conversation with a tech investor, laughing at a joke about venture capital. He posed for a photo with the mayor. He gave a quote to a reporter about economic growth in the Pacific Northwest. But underneath the perfect smile, underneath the tailored tuxedo and the practiced charm, something had shifted. A small crack in the foundation. A reminder that some things, no matter how deep you bury them, have a way of rising back to the surface. He pushed the thought away. He was Julian Banks. He controlled narratives. He managed outcomes. He decided what was real and what was simply unfortunate history. The girl, if she even remembered him, was nothing. A liability he'd already paid for. A chapter closed. Or so he told himself as the champagne flowed and the orchestra played and the polished lie of his perfect life continued without interruption. For now. Althea Shin's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., the same as it did every morning. She didn't snooze. She couldn't afford to. The diner shift started at 6, and being late meant losing hours she desperately needed. She rolled out of the narrow bed in her studio apartment, her feet hitting the cold floor with practiced silence. The apartment was small enough that she could see everything from where she stood, the kitchenette with its single burner, the desk piled with textbooks and unpaid bills, the window that looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door. 14 feet by 18 feet. 252 square feet of everything she owned in the world. She dressed quickly in the dim light, pulling on jeans worn soft at the knees and a black t-shirt that smelled faintly of fryer oil no matter how many times she washed it. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a face she'd learned not to look at too closely, deep mahogany skin, dark eyes that carried too much weight for 19 years, and a jawline that stubbornly reminded her of someone she'd never met. Someone who'd made it very clear he didn't want to meet her either. Althea splashed cold water on her face and pulled her hair back into a tight ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry. Nothing that required time or money she didn't have. She grabbed her backpack, heavy with the community college textbooks she'd been reading between diner shifts, and headed out the door. The bus ride to the diner took 20 minutes. She spent it reviewing chemistry notes, her pen moving across the margins of her notebook as she memorized formulas she'd need for next week's exam. Around her, the city woke up slowly, construction workers heading to job sites, nurses finishing night shifts, students plugging in headphones and pretending the world didn't exist. Althea existed in all of it and none of it. Invisible. Unnoticed. A shadow. The diner was called Rosie's, though no one named Rosie had owned it in at least a decade. It smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the dreams people gave up somewhere between high school and middle age. Althea tied on her apron and started the opening routine, brewing coffee, wiping down tables, filling sugar dispensers. "Morning, sweetheart," called Tom, the line cook. He was 60, with tattoos that had faded to blue-green smudges and a kindness that Althea suspected came from his own hard years. "Morning," she replied, forcing a smile that almost felt real. The breakfast rush started at 7. Althea moved between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders, delivering food, refilling coffee cups with the kind of invisible service that good waitresses perfected. She smiled at customers. She laughed at bad jokes. She pretended that carrying plates for $6 an hour plus tips was exactly where she wanted to be. Her hands trembled sometimes. Not from fear or weakness, but from the weight of carrying a reality that most people never had to think about. The reality of being unwanted. Of being a problem solved with money and legal papers. Of knowing that somewhere in the city, in a house she'd never seen, lived a man who shared her DNA but had spent 19 years pretending she didn't exist. Julian Banks. Her father. The man who'd looked at her mother's pregnancy test and seen nothing but a business problem to manage. During her break, Althea sat in the diner's back office and ate the breakfast special that Tom always made for her without charging. Scrambled eggs, toast, hash browns. Food that would keep her going through the double shift ahead. She pulled out her phone and did what she'd done 100 times before, searched her father's name. The results were always the same. Articles about business deals. Photos from charity events. A family portrait showing Julian Banks with his wife and their 2 children, the legitimate ones, the wanted ones, all smiling like they'd never known struggle. Althea stared at the photo. At the boy and girl who looked about the right age to be her half-siblings. At the woman with blonde hair and diamond earrings. At the man whose eyes she'd inherited along with his denial. She wondered if they knew about her. Probably not. She was the secret buried in legal files. The mistake was corrected before it could become inconvenient. Her shift manager poked his head into the office. Althea, table 6 needs you. She closed the browser and stood, slipping her phone back into her pocket. Back to work. Back to the margins. Back to the life of someone who existed in the shadows of other people's carefully constructed worlds. But as she tied her apron and returned to the dining room, something felt different. A tension in the air she couldn't name. Like the moment before lightning strikes, when the world holds its breath and waits for the inevitable. She pushed the feeling away and picked up her order pad. Some things, she'd learned, were better left alone. Some lies were too big to fight. The convoy appeared on 5th Avenue at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, 3 matte black SUVs moving in perfect formation through downtown Seattle's lunch hour traffic. They didn't use sirens or flashing lights. They didn't need to. There was something about the way they moved, smooth, deliberate, unstoppable, that made other drivers instinctively pull aside. Shin Yong-Sun sat in the center vehicle, his posture perfectly straight despite the 20-minute drive from his hotel. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His tie was silver, knotted with military precision. His cufflinks were platinum, simple and expensive. He looked like a man attending a business meeting. He was attending an execution. The convoy stopped directly in front of Banks Tower, a glass and steel monument to Julian's success that dominated the Seattle skyline. The building was 42 stories of corporate power, each floor rented to companies that paid premium prices to have a Banks International address. Yong-Sun's driver opened the door without a word. 6 men emerged from the accompanying vehicles, all wearing identical dark suits, all moving with the controlled precision of soldiers. They didn't fan out or draw weapons. They simply stood, creating a wall of presence that stopped foot traffic on the sidewalk. Pedestrians slowed. Some took photos. Others crossed to the opposite side of the street, their instincts warning them that whatever was happening, they didn't want to be part of it. Yong-Sun stepped out of the vehicle, his leather shoes touching the pavement with barely a sound. He buttoned his suit jacket with one hand, his movements unhurried, methodical. He looked up at Banks Tower, his expression revealing nothing. No anger. No anticipation. Just the calm focus of a predator that had already decided how the hunt would end. "Sir," his lead security said quietly, gesturing toward the building's entrance. Yong-Sun nodded once and began walking. His stride was measured, efficient, covering ground without appearing to rush. Behind him, 4 of his men followed at precisely 6 feet, their formation loose but deliberate. They moved through the building's revolving doors like a knife sliding through silk. The lobby was all polished marble and expensive art, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small and impressed at the same time. A security desk sat near the elevators, manned by 2 guards in crisp uniforms. One of them stood as Yong-Sun approached. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have an appointment?" Yong-Sun stopped 3 feet from the desk. He didn't smile. He didn't reach for identification. He simply existed in the space with such complete authority that the guard's question hung in the air like something foolish. "I am here to see Julian Banks," Yong-Sun said. His English was perfect, his accent minimal, his tone absolutely flat. "He is expecting me." The guard glanced at his computer screen, clearly confused. "I don't see anything scheduled for." "He is expecting me," Yong-Sun repeated, not raising his voice, not changing his expression. The words carried the weight of simple fact. "You will call his office. You will use my name, Shin Yong-Sun. You will tell him I have arrived." Something in the guard's face changed. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or simply the survival instinct that tells small animals when they've encountered something dangerous. He picked up the phone, his movements suddenly careful, deliberate. "Yes, this is lobby security. I have Shin Yong-Sun here requesting to see Mr. Banks." A pause. "Yes, sir. Right away." The guard hung up, his expression now carefully neutral. Mr. Banks will see you. 40th floor. Executive suite. Yong-Sun nodded and moved toward the elevators. His men followed, their presence filling the lobby like smoke. The elevator doors opened immediately, as if the building itself was cooperating. As they rose, Yong-Sun stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the ascending numbers. 15. 20. 30. Each floor a step closer to the confrontation 19 years in the making. His assistant, a lean man named Kim, spoke quietly. The lawyers are standing by if needed, sir. There will be no lawyers, Yong-Sun said. This is not a legal matter. This is a matter of blood. Of truth. Of accountability. The elevator chimed at 40. The doors opened onto a reception area decorated in the same expensive style as the lobby. Glass walls. Abstract art. Furniture that looked uncomfortable but cost a fortune. A receptionist stood quickly, her smile professional but strained. Mr. Shin, if you'll follow me, please. She led them down a hallway lined with photographs of Julian at various events, shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons, accepting awards. Each image was carefully chosen to project success, power, control. They stopped at a heavy wooden door. The receptionist knocked twice and opened it without waiting for a response. Julian's office was everything Yong-Sun expected, enormous windows overlooking Elliott Bay, a desk the size of a small car, leather furniture arranged to demonstrate both wealth and taste. And behind the desk, standing with his arms crossed and his expression carefully arranged into something resembling confidence, was Julian Banks. Yong-Sun stepped inside with predatory grace, his movements fluid and controlled. He stopped in the center of the room, exactly 6 feet from Julian's desk, and allowed the silence to stretch. Julian spoke first, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a skilled negotiator. Mr. Shin. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. Yong-Sun's expression didn't change. We do not have a meeting, Mr. Banks. We have a reckoning. The black car arrived at Rosie's diner at 4:15 p.m., pulling up to the curb with the kind of smooth precision that made heads turn. Althea was clearing table 9 when she noticed it through the window, sleek, expensive, completely out of place on this street of check-cashing stores and laundromats. A man in a dark suit stepped out. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of posture that suggested military training. He walked into the diner with purpose, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Althea. Althea Shin. His voice was quiet, respectful, but left no room for confusion. Every muscle in Althea's body tensed. Her hands tightened around the coffee pot she was holding. Who's asking? My employer requests your presence. It concerns your father, Julian Banks. The coffee pot nearly slipped from her grip. Around her, the diner had gone quiet. Tom was watching from the kitchen window. A regular customer at the counter had stopped mid-bite. I don't have a father, Althea said automatically, the words worn smooth from years of repetition. Nevertheless. The man gestured toward the door. Please. This is not a request you want to refuse. There was something in his tone, not threatening, exactly, but absolute. Like gravity. Like inevitability. Althea looked at Tom, who nodded slowly, giving her permission she hadn't asked for. She untied her apron with trembling hands and followed the man outside. The car ride took 30 minutes. Althea sat in the back seat, her backpack clutched in her lap like a shield, watching the city transform through the window. They left behind the familiar streets of her neighborhood and entered a world of glass towers and luxury hotels. The driver said nothing. The suited man beside her stared straight ahead. Finally, they pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building Althea recognized from her internet searches. Banks Tower. Her father's building. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they rode the elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything was white and chrome and cold perfection. A woman in an expensive dress led them down a hallway to a room with frosted glass doors. Please wait here, she said, her smile professional and empty. The door closed, and Althea found herself alone in what could only be called a luxury consultation room. It was smaller than Julian's office but still larger than her entire apartment. A long glass table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than she made in a year. The walls were decorated with abstract art she didn't understand. One entire side was floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Althea stood in the middle of it all, feeling small against the sterile wealth. Her jeans suddenly felt too worn. Her t-shirt, too cheap. Her existence, too unwanted. She wondered if this was how her father wanted her to feel. Small. Insignificant. Easy to dismiss. The door opened, and a man entered. Not Julian, someone else. Asian, maybe late 40s, wearing a suit that somehow made the expensive room look ordinary. His presence filled the space instantly, quiet but absolute. "Miss Shin," he said, his accent slight but precise. "My name is Shin Yong-Sun. Please, sit." Althea didn't move. "What is this? Why am I here?" Yong-Sun regarded her with dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "You are here because 19 years ago, your father made a choice. He chose to deny your existence. To erase you from his life as if you were a business problem to be solved with money and paperwork." The words hit Althea like physical blows. Hearing it said out loud, so clinical, so matter-of-fact, somehow made it worse than all the years of silence. "I know that," she said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "What you do not know," Yong-Sun continued, "is that his denial occurred within my territory. In Seoul. Where I have influence. Where bloodlines matter. Where family is not something you can simply purchase your way out of." He gestured to the chair again. "Please. Sit. We have much to discuss." Althea sat, her legs suddenly weak. Her hands trembled in her lap, that familiar trembling that came from carrying weight she'd never asked for. "I don't understand. Who are you? Why do you care?" "I care," Yong-Sun said, taking the seat across from her, "because in my world, there are rules. Laws that matter more than money. And one of those laws is simple: you do not abandon blood. You do not pretend your children do not exist." His gaze never wavered. "Your father broke this rule. And now, he will answer for it." The door opened again. Althea turned, and there he was. Julian Banks. Her father. The man from all those internet searches, now standing in the same room, breathing the same air. He looked older than his photos. Tired. And when his eyes met hers for the first time in 19 years, she saw something flicker across his face. Not love. Not joy. Recognition. And fear. "Sit down, Mr. Banks," Yong-Sun said quietly. "We are going to settle this today." Althea's hands stopped trembling. She sat up straighter. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small at all. Julian remained standing near the door, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked at Yong-Sun, then at Althea, then back to Yong-Sun. His expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and finally settled on something that resembled controlled anger. "I don't know what you think this is," Julian said, his voice carrying the sharp edge of a man used to being obeyed, "but I'm not going to be ambushed in my own building by." Yong-Sun raised a single finger. Not aggressively. Not dismissively. Simply one finger, lifted from the table with the kind of quiet authority that stopped Julian's words as effectively as a hand over his mouth. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stood frozen, his sentence hanging unfinished in the air. His face flushed red, the color starting at his collar and spreading upward. He was a man who controlled boardrooms, who commanded respect from senators and CEOs, who had spent 3 decades building an empire on the foundation of his own authority. And he'd just been silenced by a single finger. "Sit," Yong-Sun said. The word wasn't loud. It wasn't harsh. It was simply inevitable. Julian's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at the door, perhaps calculating whether he could leave, whether his security would respond if he called. But something in Yong-Sun's expression, that calm, patient certainty, made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. He sat. The chair scraped against the floor, the sound too loud in the quiet room. Julian positioned himself at the opposite end of the table from Althea, as far away as the furniture would allow. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks, small gestures meant to reclaim some dignity. "This is ridiculous," he said, though his voice had lost its earlier force. "I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but you have no authority over me. This is my building. My city. Yong-Sun folded his hands on the table, his movements precise and controlled. Your city, he repeated, as if testing the words. Interesting. Tell me, Mr. Banks, do you know what I do? Julian's jaw worked. I don't care what you do. You should. Yong-Sun's tone didn't change, didn't sharpen. Because 19 years ago, you were in Seoul on business. You met a woman. You had a relationship with her, brief as it was. And when she told you she was pregnant, you responded with lawyers and money and legal documents designed to erase your responsibility. Althea felt her chest tighten. Hearing it laid out so plainly, so clinically, made it somehow more real than all the years of wondering. Julian's face had gone pale now, the red flush fading to something closer to gray. That was a private matter. Settled legally. You have no right to. The finger rose again. Julian stopped immediately. Seoul is my territory, Yong-Sun continued, his voice still perfectly calm. What happens there, who is harmed there, concerns me. And Miss Shin's mother, your daughter's mother, was harmed. Not physically, perhaps, but in ways that matter. You used your wealth and your lawyers to make a problem disappear. You treated human life as if it were a business transaction. I paid what was owed, Julian said, his voice tight. More than was owed. The agreement was signed. Both parties accepted. Both parties. Yong-Sun's eyes shifted to Althea. And what about the third party, Mr. Banks? What about the child who had no voice in your agreement? What about your daughter? Julian's hands gripped the edge of the table. When he spoke, his voice had taken on a petulant quality, like a child being scolded for something he didn't think was wrong. She was taken care of. Financially provided for. I fulfilled my legal obligations. Legal obligations, Yong-Sun repeated. You speak of obligations as if they exist only on paper. As if blood can be negotiated like a contract. What do you want? Julian demanded, his composure finally cracking. Money? Is that what this is? Some kind of shakedown? Yong-Sun smiled. It was a small expression, barely a curve of his lips, but it carried more menace than any shout. I want what you have spent 19 years denying. I want the truth. Official. Documented. Undeniable. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a document, placing it on the table. Then another. Then a small sealed kit. This, Yong-Sun said, is a DNA testing kit. Court certified. Legally binding. You and your daughter will provide samples. The results will be processed by an independent laboratory. And when those results confirm what we all already know, that Althea Shin is your biological daughter, you will acknowledge her. Publicly. Legally. Completely. Julian stared at the kit as if it were a weapon. You can't force me to. I am not forcing you, Yong-Sun said quietly. I am offering you a choice. Submit to the test willingly, or I will make certain that every business partner you have, every investor, every politician you've bought lunch for, learns about the daughter you abandoned. I will ensure that your carefully constructed reputation crumbles under the weight of your own cowardice. Althea watched her father's face cycle through emotions, anger, fear, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like defeat. This is extortion, Julian said weakly. This is accountability, Yong-Sun corrected. Something you have avoided for far too long. A woman in a white lab coat entered the room at precisely 5:30 p.m. She carried a metal briefcase and moved with the efficient calm of someone who had done this procedure 1,000 times. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask questions. She simply set the briefcase on the table, opened it, and began removing items with practiced precision. Swabs sealed in sterile packages. Clear plastic tubes with labels. Forms printed on official letterhead. A small electronic device with a screen that glowed faint blue. I am Dr. Patricia Chen from SeaTac Independent Laboratories, she said, her voice neutral and professional. I will be collecting DNA samples for paternity testing. This process is legally binding and will be documented according to state and federal guidelines. Althea watched as the doctor arranged everything in perfect rows on the table. Each movement was deliberate, methodical, like a ritual that had been performed exactly the same way countless times before. Julian sat rigid in his chair, his face pale, his hands gripping the armrests. He looked like a man watching his execution being prepared. "Mr. Banks," Dr. Shin said, "please state your full legal name for the record." Julian's jaw clenched. For a moment, Althea thought he might refuse, might stand up and walk out despite everything Yong-Sun had said. But then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he spoke. "Julian Marcus Banks. Date of birth? March 14, 1974. Dr. Shin wrote this down, then turned to Althea. "Miss Shin, your full legal name?" "Althea Moon Shin." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Date of birth? August 22, 2006. The numbers hung in the air. August 2006. 9 months after Julian's business trip to Seoul. The math was simple, undeniable, damning. Dr. Shin opened the first sterile package. "Mr. Banks, I'll need you to open your mouth, please." Julian hesitated, then complied. The doctor swabbed the inside of his cheek with quick, efficient strokes. The swab went into a tube, the tube was sealed, labeled, and set aside. The whole process took less than 30 seconds. "Miss Shin." Althea opened her mouth. She felt the rough texture of the swab against the inside of her cheek, tasted the faint chemical coating. Her sample joined Julian's on the table, 2 tubes side by side, father and daughter reduced to strands of DNA waiting to confirm what everyone already knew. Dr. Shin filled out forms, attached labels, and scanned barcodes with her electronic device. Each action was accompanied by a small beep. Each beep was recorded, time-stamped, and made official. "The samples will be processed at our laboratory," Dr. Shin said, packing everything back into the briefcase with the same precision she'd used to remove it. "Results typically take 3 to 5 business days. However, Mr. Shin has requested expedited processing. You will have results within 48 hours. She closed the briefcase with a decisive click, nodded once to Yong-Sun, and left. The silence that followed was suffocating. On the wall, a clock ticked. Not a rhythmic beep like the doctor's scanner, but a steady, mechanical progression of seconds. Each tick was a reminder that time was moving forward, that the moment of truth was approaching, that denial had an expiration date. Althea stared at her hands. They weren't trembling anymore. She felt oddly calm, hollow almost, like she'd passed through fear into something else entirely. For 19 years, she'd existed in the space between truth and lie. Now that space was closing. Julian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Is that all? Can I go?" Yong-Sun remained seated, perfectly still. "You may leave. But understand this, Mr. Banks, in 48 hours, when those results arrive, your life as you know it ends. You will acknowledge your daughter. You will provide for her properly. You will give her the name she has been denied. And if I refuse?" Julian's voice carried false bravado, the last desperate gasp of a drowning man. "Then I will destroy you." Yong-Sun's tone didn't change, didn't sharpen. Not with violence. Not with threats. But with truth. "I will ensure that every newspaper, every business journal, every social media platform knows the story of Julian Banks, the man who abandoned his daughter and spent 19 years pretending she didn't exist." Julian's face went from pale to gray. "You can't." "I can. And I will." Yong-Sun finally stood, buttoning his suit jacket with one hand. "You have 48 hours to prepare yourself. I suggest you use them wisely." Julian looked at Althea one last time. Their eyes met across the glass table. She wanted him to say something, anything, an apology, an explanation, even an excuse. But he said nothing. He simply turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Althea released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The clock continued its steady progression. Tick. 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 48 hours until the truth became official. 48 hours until everything changed. The call came at 11:47 p.m. that same night. Althea was lying on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. When her phone buzzed, she almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. But something made her pick up. "Hello. Miss Shin." The voice was familiar, polished, controlled. "Julian Banks. I believe we need to talk. Privately." Althea sat up, her heart suddenly pounding. "How did you get my number?" "That's not important. What's important is that we resolve this situation before it becomes complicated." A pause. "There's a coffee shop on Pine Street. Marino's. Can you meet me there in 30 minutes? Every instinct told her to refuse. To hang up. To let the next 48 hours play out exactly as Yong-Sun had planned. But curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, something that still wanted to hear what her father might say, made her agree. 30 minutes, she said, and ended the call. Marino's was the kind of place that stayed open late for insomniacs and college students. When Althea arrived, Julian was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He'd changed from his suit into casual clothes, expensive casual, the kind that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He stood when she approached. A gentleman's gesture, automatic and meaningless. "Thank you for coming," he said. Althea slid into the opposite side of the booth, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't order anything. She didn't smile. She simply waited. Julian cleared his throat. "I want to apologize for today. For the circumstances. That man, Shin Yong-Sun, had no right to ambush us like that." "He had every right," Althea said quietly. "You're the one who had no right. 19 years of no right." Julian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fair enough. You're angry. I understand that. And you deserve to be." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more calculated. "But we don't need to let this become a public spectacle. We can resolve this quietly. Between us." Althea felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that a DNA test is unnecessary. We both know the truth. You're my daughter. I'm not denying that anymore." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, setting it on the table between them. "I'm prepared to offer you a settlement. A generous one. Enough to finish your education. To start a real life. To never have to worry about money again." Althea stared at the envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, and expensive. Like everything else in Julian's world. "How much?" she asked, her voice flat. $250,000. Immediate transfer. No taxes, no delays. It's yours. Julian's expression was earnest now, practiced sincerity that probably worked in boardrooms. "All I ask is that you call off Yong-Sun, tell him you've changed your mind. That you don't want the public acknowledgement. That we've come to a private understanding." The silence stretched between them. Outside, rain had started to fall, drumming against the coffee shop windows with a steady rhythm. Althea looked at her father. Really looked at him. She saw the desperation hiding behind the mask of control. The fear beneath the polish. The calculation in every word, every gesture. "You think this is about money," she said finally. "Everything is about money," Julian replied, a hint of his old confidence returning. "That's how the world works. I learned that lesson early. You just need the right amount." "You're wrong." Althea's voice was steady, calm, cold as the rain outside. "This isn't about money. This is about truth. About acknowledgement. About the fact that I exist and you pretended I didn't. The money is the acknowledgement," Julian insisted. "It's proof that I take responsibility. That I care about your future." "You care about your reputation," Althea corrected. "You care about not being exposed. You care about keeping your perfect life intact." She stood, leaving the envelope untouched on the table. "I don't want your quiet settlement. I don't want your guilty conscience's money. I want what Yong-Sun promised. Official acknowledgement. Legal recognition. The truth on paper that can't be denied or hidden or bought." Julian's mask slipped. His expression hardened, the polish cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. "You're making a mistake. If you pursue this, if you let that man expose our private business, you'll regret it. The media will tear you apart. They'll call you a gold digger, an opportunist. Let them. Althea's hands weren't trembling. Her voice didn't shake. She felt something like steel forming in her spine, cold and unbreakable. I've spent 19 years being nobody. Being the girl who didn't exist. I won't beg for your approval anymore. I won't flinch because you threaten me with public opinion. She turned to leave, then paused. The DNA results will arrive in 46 hours. I'll see you then. Julian remained seated, the rejected envelope sitting on the table like evidence of his failure. Althea walked out into the rain, feeling it soak through her jacket, cold and cleansing. She didn't look back. The email arrived at exactly 9 a.m. on Friday, 47 hours and 13 minutes after the samples were collected. Althea was at the diner, pouring coffee for the morning regulars, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She waited until her break to check it. The subject line read, DNA test results, case hashtag 2025-47B, confidential. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Not from fear this time. From anticipation. From the knowledge that the next word she read would change everything. But the email simply contained instructions. Please report to Banks Tower, 40th floor, conference room B at 2 p.m. today for official reading of results. All parties required to attend. Althea called in sick for her evening shift. Tom didn't ask questions. At 1:45 p.m., she stood outside Banks Tower in the same worn jeans and black t-shirt she'd worn to the first meeting. She hadn't tried to dress up. Hadn't tried to look like she belonged. She was done pretending to be anything other than exactly who she was. The same suited man from before met her in the lobby. He led her to the 40th floor in silence. Conference room B was larger than the consultation room. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by executive chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Elliott Bay, gray and choppy under gathering clouds. Yong-Sun was already seated at the head of the table, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. Dr. Chen sat to his right, a manila folder closed in front of her. Two lawyers. Althea didn't recognize occupied chairs along the side wall, their presence official and observant. Julian entered 3 minutes later. He wore a suit, navy blue, impeccably tailored, but something about him looked diminished. His shoulders weren't quite as straight. His expression wasn't quite as controlled. He took a seat as far from Althea as possible, his eyes fixed on the folder in front of Dr. Chen. Now that all parties are present, Yong-Sun said, his voice cutting through the silence, Dr. Chen will read the official results. Dr. Chen opened the folder with clinical precision. She withdrew several pages of dense text, graphs, numbers that meant nothing to Althea but everything to science. The DNA samples were analyzed using standard PCR methodology, Dr. Chen began, her tone professionally neutral. We examined 24 genetic markers to determine the biological relationship between Julian Marcus Banks and Althea Moon Shin. Julian's hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles had gone white. Dr. Chen continued, reading from the report. Sample A, identified as Julian Marcus Banks, and Sample B, identified as Althea Moon Shin, show a genetic match probability of 99.9997%. This result conclusively establishes that Julian Marcus Banks is the biological father of Althea Moon Shin. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Julian's face had gone pale, then gray, the color draining away as if someone had opened a valve. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to the lawyers, to Yong-Sun, to the door, anywhere but at Althea. There must be some mistake, he said, his voice hollow. The samples could have been contaminated. The lab could have made an error. There is no error, Dr. Chen said simply. The results have been verified by 2 independent technicians. The chain of custody was maintained throughout. This finding is legally binding and admissible in court. Julian stood abruptly, his chair rolling back and hitting the wall. His arrogance, that careful mask of control and superiority, had completely crumbled. What remained was something closer to true terror. The terror of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. You can't use this, he said, his voice rising. This was coerced. Yong-Sun forced me to take that test. No court would. Yong-Sun raised one finger. Julian stopped mid-sentence, the habit of obedience already learned. The test was voluntary, Yong-Sun said quietly. You were given a choice. You chose to participate. And now, the truth has been established. He gestured to one of the lawyers, who slid a document across the table toward Julian. This is a legal acknowledgement of paternity. You will sign it. Today. Here. With witnesses present. Julian stared at the document as if it were a death warrant. And if I refuse? Then I will release these results to every news outlet in Seattle, Yong-Sun said, his tone unchanged. By Monday morning, the story of Julian Banks, businessman, philanthropist, and father who denied his daughter for 19 years, will be front-page news. Your choice is simple: sign the document privately and maintain some control over the narrative, or refuse and watch me destroy your reputation publicly. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, the clouds had thickened, darkening the room despite the afternoon hour. Rain began to fall against the windows, steady and relentless. Julian looked at the document. At the pen placed beside it. At Althea, who sat perfectly still, her expression was a mask of stone. His hand shook as he reached for the pen. Where do I sign? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. One of the lawyers leaned forward, pointing to a line at the bottom of the page. Julian's signature was messy, rushed, nothing like the confident flourish he probably used on business contracts. But it was official. Legal. Binding. Dr. Chen witnessed it. The lawyers witnessed it. Yong-Sun witnessed it. And just like that, 19 years of denial were officially terminated. Althea Shin was no longer a ghost, a secret, a problem to be managed. She was acknowledged. She was real. She existed. Julian left first, his exit rushed and graceless. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't look at Althea. Didn't acknowledge the daughter whose existence he'd just been forced to confirm on paper. He simply gathered his things and walked out, his shoulders hunched, his footsteps quick and uneven. The door closed behind him with a hollow click. Althea remained seated, staring at the signed document on the table. Her name was there, typed in official font. And below it, Julian's signature, messy, reluctant, but legally binding. Proof. Evidence. Truth rendered permanent. Dr. Chen began packing her materials, the same efficient movements she'd used during the sample collection. The lawyers murmured to each other in professional tones, discussing filing procedures and court schedules. The business of truth, reduced to paperwork and deadlines. Yong-Sun stood and buttoned his suit jacket with one hand. Miss Shin, would you walk with me? Althea nodded and rose from her chair. Her legs felt strange, not weak exactly, but different. Like she was standing taller than she had before, occupying more space. They left the conference room together, Yong-Sun's security falling into formation around them as they entered the hallway. The elevator descended in silence, the numbers counting down from 40 to lobby, each floor a step away from the confrontation that had defined the last 48 hours. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and shining under the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds. Yong-Sun's convoy waited at the curb, black and sleek and patient. You did well, Yong-Sun said, stopping near the vehicles. Many people would have accepted his bribe. Would have taken the easy money and remained in the shadows. Althea looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life like a force of nature, who had demanded truth when everyone else had been content with lies. Why did you do this? Really? You said it was about territory, about rules, but you wonder if there's more, Yong-Sun finished. He was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. My father abandoned my half-sister. Denied her existence because her mother was not Korean, because acknowledgement would have been inconvenient for his business. By the time I had enough power to force the truth, she had already disappeared. I never found her. Althea felt something shift in her understanding. This wasn't just about rules or territory. It was personal. It was redemption by proxy. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Don't be. Yong-Sun's expression hardened slightly. Be grateful. Be strong. Be everything they tried to convince you that you weren't. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, placing it in her hand. My personal number. If your father fails to honor his obligations, if he tries to hide this acknowledgement or deny you what you're owed, you call me. Althea looked at the card. Simple. Black. His name in silver lettering. What happens now? She asked. Now. Yong-Sun allowed himself a small smile. Now you decide who you want to be. You are no longer Althea Shin, the unwanted daughter. You are Althea Shin, acknowledged heir to the bank's fortune. Your father will be required to provide support, to include you in his estate planning, to treat you as he treats his other children. The law is on your side now. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw texts from the diner, her manager asking if she could cover tomorrow's shift, a coworker complaining about a difficult customer, the mundane details of a life she'd been living for 19 years. A life that suddenly felt very far away. Althea stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, she powered the phone off. She wasn't just silencing a ringtone, she was silencing an entire era of her life. Somewhere behind her, in the heights of Banks Tower, she knew Julian was frantically calling his crisis managers, trying to spin a story to save his reputation. But he was too late. The foundation of his perfect life hadn't just cracked, it had been signed away. I need to give notice at the diner, she said, her voice sounding entirely new to her own ears. And I should probably quit my night class. I'm done studying how to survive. It's time I learned how to rule. Yong-Sun nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals. You were always visible, Miss Shin. They simply chose not to look. Now, they will have no choice but to watch you. He gestured to the convoy. My people will take you wherever you need to go. And remember, you are not asking for anything. You are claiming what has always been yours. Althea climbed into the back of the Mercedes, the heavy door closing with a solid, expensive thud that muffled the noise of the city. As the car pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of the tower in the rearview mirror. Julian had spent 19 years trying to keep her out of his world, but now, her name was written into its very foundation. He had built an empire, and she was the one who would decide what to do with the ruins. The convoy moved through the streets, smooth and powerful, carrying her toward a future she was only beginning to imagine. Behind her, Banks Tower grew smaller, a monument to a man who had lost everything because he forgot that blood is thicker than ink. Ahead, the city opened wide. And for the first time in 19 years, Althea Moon Shin wasn't running. She was arriving. The Banks estate in Madison Park was a fortress of glass, limestone, and silence. Inside, the air was climate-controlled to a perfect 72 degrees, smelling faintly of expensive lilies and floor wax. Caroline Banks sat at the head of the mahogany dining table, the candlelight reflecting off her perfectly manicured nails. Across from her, Marcus and Sophia were staring at their phones, the blue light of the screens clashing with the warm glow of the chandelier. Put the phones away, Caroline said, her voice a practiced melody of maternal authority. Your father will be home any minute. He said he had a difficult day at the office. She didn't know half of it. She didn't know that 3 miles away, in a sleek black Mercedes, that difficult day was about to become a permanent nightmare. The front door opened. Julian stepped in, but he didn't call out a greeting. He moved like a man who had forgotten how his own legs worked. His tie was loosened, his hair, usually a silver helmet of perfection, was disheveled. Julian. Caroline stood, her brow furrowing. You look gray. Is it the Bellevue deal? Julian opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. How do you tell your wife of 18 years that the foundation of your marriage was built on a 19-year-old silence? Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. Are we expecting someone? Caroline asked, looking at the security monitor in the hallway. Julian turned, his heart freezing. He knew. He knew before the door even opened. The housekeeper opened the heavy oak door, and for a moment, the Seattle rain blurred the figure standing on the porch. Then, she stepped into the light. Althea didn't look like a waitress anymore. She wore a charcoal wool coat, provided by Yong-Sun, and her mahogany skin glowed against the white marble of the foyer. She looked like a queen entering a rival's palace. Behind her, 2 of Yong-Sun's men stood like statues on the driveway, their presence a silent promise of protection. Can I help you? Caroline asked, stepping forward. She was still wearing the diamonds from Chapter 1. She looked at Althea with the polite confusion one reserves for a delivery person who has the wrong address. Althea didn't look at Caroline. She looked straight at Julian, who was trembling in the shadows of the hallway. "You left this at the office," Althea said, her voice steady and clear, echoing off the high ceilings. She held out a manila envelope. Caroline reached for it, but Julian lunged forward. "Caroline, don't." It was too late. Caroline's fingers moved with the grace of a socialite opening an invitation. She pulled out the document. Her eyes scanned the header, SeaTac Independent Laboratories. Then the names, Julian Marcus Banks. Althea Shin. And finally, the number, 99.9997%. The silence that followed was louder than the orchestra in the Emerald Ballroom. Marcus and Sophia had wandered into the foyer, sensing the shift in the air. "Dad?" Marcus asked, looking at his father's ghostly face. "Who is this?" Althea stepped further into the house, her boots clicking on the marble, the same sound Julian's shoes had made for years, the sound of a Banks claiming their territory. "I'm Althea," she said, looking at the two teenagers who had the same jawline, the same stubborn set to their shoulders as her. "And I'm not a mistake anymore." Caroline looked from the paper to Althea, then finally to her husband. The scream didn't come. Instead, she let out a small, jagged laugh, the sound of a life breaking into a million pieces. 19 years, Julian?" Caroline whispered. "You let me build a life on a grave?" "I can explain," Julian began, but the lie felt heavy in his mouth. The polished mask was gone. He was just an old man in an expensive suit, trapped in a house full of strangers. Althea turned toward the door, her work here finished. She didn't need their love, and she didn't need their permission. She had seen the inside of the fortress, and it wasn't nearly as strong as she had feared. "Good night, Julian," Althea said. "I'll see you in court on Monday for the trust restructuring." She walked back out into the rain, leaving the door wide open. Behind her, the screaming finally started. The secret is finally out. Caroline spent 18 years building a perfect family, only to find out it was a lie. Julian is a coward, but Althea showing up at the front door just destroyed two innocent teenagers' lives. Who do you feel for the most right now, Caroline, who was betrayed, or Althea, who finally claimed her place? Let's settle this in the comments.